Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about inner child work. What is it and how do we do it? But before we jump into that, are you new to my channel? Welcome! I release videos on Mondays and on Thursdays, so make sure you're subscribed and have those notifications turned on so that you don't miss out. But now let's jump into today's very important and very requested topic. Inner child work is something therapists and other mental health professionals talk about all the time. But like a lot of things, we never really explain what it means or even what you need in order to do it. Like myself included. Sorry, I feel like I've been talking about this in videos all the time, but I've never actually done a video where I tell you what this means. So let's get into it. Now first, I think it's important to know that usually when someone is talking about inner child work, they're mentioning it in reference to trauma work. Okay, that's the most common because traditionally it was believed that we will need to reconnect with our younger self, like at the time that the trauma happened. Let's say we were abused when we were 6 through 8. We're going to have to connect with us at 6 through 8 in order to heal ourselves at that age or time. Does that make sense? Hence the term doing inner child work, meaning that when we act out in certain ways as a reaction to our trauma, we are really acting out from that child's self or as that child's self. You know what I mean? Like we're essentially, when we're reacting out of our trauma, we could be acting like 6 or 8-year-old us. We could be doing childlike things, maybe stomping our feet or and just screaming out or throwing a tantrum. And it's not because we're not an adult. It's just because we haven't done that inner child work and we're acting out of that. And that's why it's so important that we do the inner child work, which I'll get into, don't worry. But does that all make sense? I hope so. Because I know this can be confusing, but I hope I'm kind of explaining it well in like a slow, easy way to understand. So if you ever have a question to follow up, let me know in the comments down below, okay? Okay, so now that we know why inner child work is a thing, because we can lash out and act out as that child's self when the trauma happened, the thing I want to talk more about is why I use it with most of my patients regardless of childhood trauma, because I don't only use this for my patients who've struggled with trauma. And you may have guessed it, but I believe we have all suffered from some trauma as a child. This could be as simple as when I was sitting on my dad's lap on the riding lawnmower. Spoilers, my parents really didn't follow, any of the rules or safety precautions, obviously. But I used to love riding the lawnmower. And I had my baby blanket with me, my pink baby blanket. And I dropped it when I was on the lawnmower, and it got sucked into the lawnmower and spread out all over the lawn. And it was terrible. I was devastated. That was my favorite blanket. It was the blanket I was brought home from the hospital in. And I'd kept it all the way until, let's say, I was like 6 years old. And so I was just totally upset, and I just couldn't be consoled. And you could say, if you're thinking about it this way, that was kind of like a little T of a trauma in my life. It could also be that time when your parents got divorced or when you had to move schools or move houses. We've all had scary and possibly traumatizing things happen to us. The problem is that as an adult, we don't see it as such. Instead, we look back through our adult lens, our sage, advice and all of our experiences, and we say to ourselves, well, it wasn't really that big of a deal. I was just being a baby about it. Like if I think about me dropping my blanket, I could say it was just a blanket. And like my mom got me another one that's almost exactly the same like the week later. No, that doesn't mean that I didn't feel really upset then. That doesn't mean that how I experienced it as 6-year-old me isn't valid. We always do that as adults. We invalidate and downplay our experiences at that time because we're looking back with adult eyes, and we can't truly, not always, unless we get really in touch with ourselves and we're mindful, we can't always allow ourselves to go back there because it was scary. We don't want to. So instead we look back and judge. And so by working with a therapist to do this inner child work that we're talking about, we're hoping that you'll be able to connect with that young, vulnerable, and probably hurting part of yourself. Because it is out of that self that all of our unhealthy coping skills or self-sabotaging behavior comes from. And in a way, it's like we're cutting through all the current garbage and issues and getting right to the root of the root. You know how important I talk about getting to the root of the root, which really just means like, what's the real reason this is happening? Sure, you're stressed out or upset right now because of X, Y, and Z, but why is that so triggering for you and so upsetting when other people might have similar situations and not be as upset? What's the real root of the root? What's really causing that? And it could be coming out of our childhood self. Now this work, this inner child work we're talking about, obviously can only be done when we have a good relationship with our therapist and feel safe enough to get into it. It can be really hard and really scary to go back into that child version of ourselves, especially when we're purposefully choosing a really scary and shitty time in our life. And if we don't feel safe in the therapy room, or if our therapist isn't really mindful and aware, like a lot of the therapy stuff that I do, I'm so used to my patients and the way that they react physically, like in the room, if they're really shaky or if they're moving funny or they're not making eye contact, there are certain things I look for to tap into to know when it's too much for them. And so you really need to have that close connection where you feel like the therapist really gets you and they know how hard to push, but not to push too hard. And so you really want to have that connection before you really get into this work. And I just want to put that out there so no one gets re-traumatized and no one feels like you have to do it right away. This is something you kind of work up to in your therapy. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty of how we do it and how we would do inner child work. And one of the first things I have my patients do is to have them write a letter to their younger self and sort of start a pen pal-like relationship with that childlike self. And the goal isn't for us to start acting like a child, but instead for us to get back some of the innocence, excitement, understanding, and maybe joy that we used to have. In a way, we're trying to get back in touch with that self prior to any trauma. I have my clients often start writing letters to themselves before the bad thing happened. I want them to get back in touch with who they were and what that was like for them and get in that mindset of that childlike self so we can see just how hard or traumatizing that situation was. Because then we can work to heal it. And through writing back and forth, we can explore old memories, feelings, and how it may still be affecting us. It can take time and be really, really difficult, but trust me, it can be so incredibly healing. The next thing I have my patients do is begin speaking to their inner child. Holding conversations. I know it can make you feel crazy. You can do it only in therapy if that's where it feels safest, but I usually want my patients to try to find a safe place at home to do it. And you ask your inner child what loving or supportive words or phrases they may have longed to hear. These could be things like, I see you, I hear you, or I love you. And these can be all sorts of things. Everyone's going to be different. No judgment about what phrases or words or just comfort you wish to receive when you were that age, okay? Because it's really important that we take the time to understand what you needed back then and giving yourself the opportunity to give it to yourself now. And it can honestly make all the difference. I know this can all just feel very silly and you're like, Katie, it's so weird. You're talking about yourself to yourself and having conversations with yourself and that sounds really crazy. But just trust me, no one can fill that void for us other than us. And instead of thinking of that as like hopeless or helpless, just think of it that it's great because we can't control anybody else. We can only control ourselves. And so it should be really empowering that we have all the tools we need to heal. And also being silly, to go back to that, is kind of the point of this. In order to get back to being a bit more childlike and getting more in touch with that child self that maybe didn't feel free to be goofy, we're gonna need to be okay with being a little silly. But if it's too much for you, it's okay to write these things out as well if you don't feel like having a conversation and talking it out and talking about the things that you wanted to hear or telling your younger self those things. You can write it out in those pen pal-like letters. That's totally fine too. And finally, along with talking through all the childhood trauma, because that's what we do when we're trying to process it through so the trauma doesn't affect us anymore. If we have PTSD or flashbacks, that ensures that, we've processed it until it doesn't have any emotional charge. It's not upsetting anymore. It could also help to write it out like a story or speak it as a story to your therapist. Trying your best to remember as many details as possible. I know we talk about that a lot, but the details are really important because we want to have the full picture and we want to give our brain all the information to put it together, process it, and roll it away, right? Like those marbles in Inside Out, the movie. So you could even, visualize yourself being back there if that feels safe. Again, remember, it has to be with a safe therapist in a safe setting and at your own pace. But that's helped a lot of my patients just to feel like they're back there, they visualize it. But instead of feeling helpless, you can help yourself. And often we change the narrative in that story where instead of letting that trauma happen, they're empowered and they say no, and adult them saves little them. There's all sorts of ways we can utilize that visualization or narrative type therapy to heal. There's a bunch of ways we can process it through. So know that if one of these doesn't work, there's a lot of other avenues we can go down to fix it. And like I said, if visualizing doesn't feel safe, this can also be done in letter form as well as journal entries, or even done in session with your therapist only, like whatever makes you feel safe. We want to just make sure that we're not re-traumatizing ourselves and that we're giving ourselves the space to heal the inner child of us. And this will help because not only will we reconnect with our child self and slowly heal from the trauma, but stories are the most healing way for children and adults to process things. Our brain loves stories and finds them easy to process and file away into our memory. So this can be the healing we need to stop any flashbacks or dissociation that we may be struggling with now. And I just hope that gives you a better idea of what inner child work is. Why do we do it? And why can it be so helpful in healing? But I want to hear from you. Have you done inner child work? If so, what helped you the most? Are there other questions about this that I didn't answer? Let me know in those comments down below, and I will see you next time. Bye.